Now, remember, my grandfather told me that the secret of all of the success that he created, including coming up with the idea for Manpower, building it, spreading it across the globe, even when it was a very strange idea that was not welcomed and embraced and accepted right off, especially in other parts of the world, Europe and other parts of the world where there was resistance to the concept of temporary help. Everything that he achieved, all the success, all the money, blowing through blocks and obstacles and issues with growing a business that all people involved in business struggle with, came from his ability to map out and tap power sources in what he called, and I call, the invisible world. So, what I want to talk about in this second segment is what I call the big lie. Because again, you got the visible world and you got the invisible world. And when we go into business, what we're taught is all the power's in the visible world. And you've got to learn specific strategies for marketing and sales and management and finance and all of the major areas for running a business. And we're also taught that in the visible world, you're very vulnerable to lots of forces that are outside of you and are outside of your control. You're vulnerable to what's happening in the economy worldwide these days. You're vulnerable to what happens in the stock market. You're vulnerable to what happens with what your competitors do. You're vulnerable to what employees do. And you can only control them and motivate them and teach them and such so much. So you're very vulnerable to what your team does. You're very vulnerable to so many forces. And you've got to manage all these forces. Sales, profits, expenses, all these dynamics that we're taught are just the way it is, all in the visible world, by the way. And that somehow, if you can get this wild beast of all these forces that appear to be outside of you under your control, you can get all your ducks lined up in a row and all these aspects of running your business, then you'll have a successful business and you'll continue to have a successful business. Except the problem is you can't ever do that. And I'm sure you've experienced that. If you have not for some reason, you will if you continue playing what I call the old business game, which is you can never get all those ducks in a row. Just when you think you got everything cranking on all cylinders and everything's running and your business is growing and it's profitable and it's fun and everything's going on, then something will happen. Something will happen within your own organization. Something will happen again in what appears to be outside of you, in the economy, with a competitor, with emerging technologies, with the stock market, with whatever it might be, recessions, depressions, whatever it might be. Something will come to knock one or more of your ducks out of alignment, even if you were lucky enough, which many people in the world of business never do, of getting them all aligned for a moment in time. And then there's the other piece of it is, if you can get all these things into alignment, you can get all your ducks in a row and you can keep them in a row and you can have a business that appears to be consistently successful. Then the other challenge you'll have is there'll be some price to pay for you to do that. And I talk about the visible price that we pay and the invisible price that we pay. But there's always something. Even if on the surface you can create and sustain a successful business, then there's going to be a price to pay in terms of health, relationships, free time, some other kind of a dynamic, some piece of your life, some piece of your business, a health issue is going to be out of whack, is not going to be in alignment, is not going to be optimal, is not going to be what it is that you want. And as a result, one of the things that I discovered is if you play the business game, as I call it, the way you were taught, which is assuming that all the power and all the cause and effect and everything that's really going on is controlled by what you do in the visible world, you cannot win the business game. And the interesting thing is, it was designed that way. The traditional business game was designed such that you could not actually win it, but that no matter what you did, somehow you would fail. Somehow you would not win the game. Somehow you would be caught in restrictions and limits and problems and challenges and ups and downs and all these kinds of dynamics. It was created that way on purpose, which I have more to share with you about.